get the promise. 38 years is a long time to not know what you're up to. 38 years is a hard period of time in your life, and that's what Israel was going through. And in verse 2 of this chapter, chapter 20, it tells us about the grievousness at this time. And was no water for the congregation. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people chode with Moses and spake, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us unto this evil place? It is no place of seed or of figs, or of vines or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink. And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. This was family. These people were related. They belonged to one another. But what was happening in this chapter? Israel looked at Aaron and Moses, and they began to have them as the focal point of their frustration. And they were saying, in effect, we don't like you anymore. We don't like you anymore. We just don't like the way you do things. We don't like the way you've kept us out in the wilderness. We don't like the way that you fail to lead. This is not leadership. This is crazy what's happening. We just don't like it. And all of a sudden, Moses and Aaron in that moment, they began to realize there was something that had happened since the beginning. Things had changed. Pressure has a way of changing us. And Moses began to realize that he didn't like them anymore either. It became a mutual thing. Families go through that, don't they? Where that we look and all of a sudden we realize we don't like each other anymore. Brothers who don't like sisters, sisters who don't like dads, dads who don't like the children, moms who finally get frustrated and they don't like nothing anymore. They're sick and tired of always being used. And we look and we see it's a mutual society of people who don't like each other. But you see, Moses and Aaron, they do not have the option of choosing to dislike because they're commissioned by God. They had a responsibility before God, and they went to the tabernacle in the midst of this terrible, terrible moment of disintegration. When everything in relationships has turned bad, when nobody's getting along with anybody anymore, the thing is very upset. The tension is very, very high. There is stress all over the place. And they come to the tabernacle, fall on their faces before God, and they say to God, God, this is bad. What shall we do? And God says to Moses and Aaron, and Moses in particular, he said, I want you to gather together all of the congregation. I want you to get all of Israel together, the young and the old. And when you have them together, I want you to take this rod, but I want you to use your tongue. I want you to speak to the rock. And when you speak to the rock, the water's going to come. And when they have water, they're going to feel better. It'll be better once they have water. It won't be as bad as it's been. Some of the pressure will be lifted. If they get some water, it'll be all right. Except for one thing, and that is that Moses has been hurt. Nothing hurts worse than people that belong to you, people that are a part of your life. And in that moment, there's a hurt that goes on. He's been betrayed by them. He spent his whole life with a dream that they were all going to be able to be brought into a wonderful place to live. No longer slaves and no longer poor and no longer hurt, but they're going to come to the land that God promised that flows with milk and honey. It's been his vision. And now he looks and he says, they're not worth it. They're not worth it. But you see, in this Wonderful story. We're not just seeing biblical accounts, but we're seeing what happens when people who are responsible get burned out. Whether it's a mom or a dad, a husband or a wife, people who are responsible, when they get burned out, we need to go to God for new strength. We need to go to God for help because we can tear something up. Now, all that Moses did, it was no big deal in my mind. He just was mad, hurt, and he takes the rod, and instead of speaking to the rock, he says, "You rebels, must we get water for you? Do we have to fetch water for you out of this rock?" And he takes the rod and he hits the rock twice with anger. The water flows, and God said in that moment, "Moses, you're fired. Aaron, you're fired. You're not going to bring these people into the land of promise. You're fired." Now that's pretty severe. To lose your job just because you're hurt and you're frustrated. But God said you're fired. Why? Because you can't lead people except you love. You can't lead your children. You can't lead in your marriage. You can't help your family except you love. And the moment you look at your family and say they're not worth it, you can't help them. I don't care how many times you invite them out to church. You need to be able to have faith to believe that God can turn that brother around. You have to believe that God can save that daughter. You have to believe that that sister can get right with God. The moment that you walk in unbelief concerning the people that are important to you, you will never be effective in their life. You have to believe that God can change them. God doesn't want to save somebody else. He wants to save in your home, in your family. He wants to save your kin. People that belong to you. He wants to pull them back from the power of the enemy. You are meant to be influential in their lives. And we need to spread the gospel, speak to whoever we can. But it's time to believe that God can save families. Families are in trouble today because they're angry at each other. Families are in trouble today because they don't like each other. They don't care for each other anymore. They're sick and tired of being used by one another. And they say, "Stop it, get off. You're not going to ride on me anymore. I'm sick and tired of you manipulating my life." But we belong to somebody. We belong to the people that God joins us to. And Moses and Aaron, God said, "I wanted you to give them hope. I wanted you to forget what they had done for you for a minute. Just let it go for a minute. What I wanted to do was to